Marvel has a huge villain problem, and no, I'm not just talking about Jonathan Majors, the man playing Kang, the next existential threat for the Avengers, getting exposed. I'm also not talking about the red flag that is Robert Downey Jr. signing up to play another central role as the villain Doom for the next leg of Marvel movies. I'm talking about their inability to simply craft and hold on to a good villain. In this video, I'm going to explain the problem and then propose my solution for how they could fix it moving forward. This might be a hot take, but Thanos sucked. Don't get me wrong, the movies he was in were great, but his motivation is dumb as hell.
This universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist.
Everyone communally agreed that Thanos had a relatable or reasonable goal, and when he explains it, it makes a little bit of sense for at least a few seconds. But after thinking about it for more than a minute, Thanos' master plan of eradicating half of all life in the universe is the type of thing your drunk friend says after complaining about traffic.
It's just the way it is. I'm just a messenger.
Think about it for longer than 2 minutes and you start to find some major issues. Not to get into politics, but one big fact about overpopulation is that we're nowhere near it. In fact, birth rates are declining. Hunger? We have plenty of food. The real issue is distributing it. As a species, we are very bad at distributing food, especially to logistically hard areas to get to. Resources? Killing half the people on Earth wouldn't stop singular companies from destroying our planet for profit, and it wouldn't make billionaires all of a sudden start caring about helping others. It's a silly concept to think wholeheartedly that the problem is in how many resources the universe has, and it's even sillier to think that the solution is killing half of the life in the universe. So then why does Thanos work? Well, Thanos was gifted something by Marvel that no other villain has been gifted yet.
I heard you were dead. I also heard that
you gotta like and subscribe.
And various other things.
Understanding how dumb Thanos' plan is makes you wonder why he's so effective and remembered so well. I think that aside from Josh Brolin doing a great job and giving Thanos an excellent, intimidating presence, the reason is quite simple. Thanos appears in 5 Marvel movies. This is way more than any other Marvel villain has gotten, excluding Loki, who has taken turns being on either side of the good/evil spectrum. Realistically, he's the only villain who appears as a villain in more than one movie at all. There's a very easy comparison I can make, and that would be found in Star Wars. In the original trilogy, the big bad villain is Darth Vader. However, Darth Vader is barely in the first movie. He really only steps into the movie in the 3rd act as the stakes get ramped up. He's built up as this presence off-screen, similarly to how Thanos is merely just mentioned as who Ronan is working with in Guardians Volume 1. Ronan is given his own religious motivation. He's not just an apprentice of Thanos who's doing whatever Thanos wants. The Guardians never directly interact with Thanos in the first movie, aside from Gamora being his daughter and immediately running away at the beginning of the movie, in a similar way to how Darth Vader never directly interacts with Luke in A New Hope. Luke just deals with things that Darth Vader does downstream. By the time Luke actually encounters Darth Vader, we've known of him for a whole movie. And Darth Vader isn't even finished off in this movie. He still has a whole nother movie. The villain in A New Hope is really the Empire as represented by a bunch of stormtroopers and the Death Star base itself, not Darth Vader. We've built up an anticipation of the intimidating Darth Vader by Return of the Jedi, and we have a much more complete, fleshed out idea of the evil that Luke is going up against. Now compare this to the prequels, and you'll get what I'm saying. In Episode 1, Darth Maul is introduced. He could have been a great trilogy-long villain. He could have been a great single-movie villain that's related to a even greater threat, but instead, he's a mindless henchman whose sole motivation is that he's a Sith. He's killed, and then the movie has no villain for a rather long bit. Yes, Palpatine is in the movie and technically an antagonist, but he is both uninvolved, and the fact that he is Lord Sidious is supposed to be a plot twist, so that tells me you weren't supposed to know he's a villain from movie 1. As well, prequels have the added pressure of us knowing what these movies are leading to, so we know that Lord Sidious won't be dealt with within the first 3 movies. You can also argue that the Jedi themselves are the villain, which is an argument I like, but I don't think this movie is super invested in making that a reality. All 3 of the prequels suffer from the idea of single-use villains, amongst many other issues.
Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil! From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
And while it's debatable if the MCU has as many problems as Star Wars, they do certainly have one in common, and that is single-use villains.
So in conclusion about Thanos,
His motivation is mediocre, if not just straight up bad, but because he was developed for so many movies, he works as a greater villain. Thanos is given a humanity through all of this development that even if the audience doesn't specifically agree with his motivation, they can understand how he would be fooled into believing that this is a good solution. If you look at the villains of the MCU, you might notice that there's a ton of actually great villains that, if developed, could have been way better than Thanos. For example, Ultron. Ultron is only given one movie, and it almost makes me angry when you realize how great of a villain he could have been. In the comics, Ultron is a recurring villain that evolves each time he appears. The comic run of Age of Ultron takes place in a timeline where Ultron has conquered the world, effectively extinguishing humanity, sending our heroes into hiding, where they have to come up with a plan on how to beat Ultron. In this movie, Ultron is stopped far before he can even start the Age of Ultron. Extinguishing humanity would be a big deal, but the same can also be said about extinguishing half of the life in the universe. When treated with the care that Marvel showed Thanos, it felt as big as something like that should feel. Every hero fighting as hard as they can to stop it, losing eventually, and having to reckon with that loss and figure out how to move forward in the rubble of that disaster. Ultron deserved more. He was a weapon accidentally created by Tony Stark and Bruce Banner in an attempt to be overly protective. He's a form of AI which is as relevant as ever today. His power set is clear but unique. James Spader also plays such a calm, calculated machine of a character that you ultimately buy into Ultron's ideology. Another example is Gore. Gore the God Butcher has an excellent motivation. A daughter dying while he pleads with the gods who look apathetically on his case. A man driven crazy by powerful people who get to choose who they help and who they don't. I can see a lot of people identifying with that motivation. And better yet, it was played by Christian Bale. Unfortunately, all of his potential and all of his character's potential are ruined in an absurdly stupid movie. Also, I hate this Russell Crowe performance. It should have never made it past rehearsal.
So cheer, baby cake.
To name one more good villain, look at Crow in The Eternals. Incredible potential. I know it's a bad movie, but incredible potential. A being that is actively evolving, seemingly becoming sentient before our eyes. He gains the ability to speak and even starts fighting Icarus, who has become the antagonist of the movie. Crow almost has the sympathy of the audience, really just wanting the Eternals to stop killing his kind.
You are not saviors, Eternals. You are murderers. I will kill you all for what you have done to my kind.
He has quite a unique power set. He's played by Bill Skarsgård. And what does the MCU do with him? Kills him. Kills him so nonchalantly, I still don't think they know how big of a fumble that is. Even if they didn't want him as the main villain, he was capable and frankly en route of the greatest redemption arc, seeing as they both have the common enemy of the Celestials. Especially since the villain that continues in this movie is Icarus, with his paper-thin motivation of bootlicking Celestials, until randomly he decides he's not that dedicated anymore. All of this is further compounded because the more often you introduce a villain and then kill them off in the same movie, the more an audience becomes trained to understand it doesn't matter who the villain is anymore. If you're introduced to a villain, you gotta learn their name, their backstory, their power set, their motivation, and after watching villain after villain be introduced to then just be killed off 30 minutes later, you stop wanting to go through that process. It's quite similar to how the Spider-Verse movies have made it a joke to say, you know the drill, bit by a spider, when introducing one of the many Spider-Men in each movie.
All right, let's do this one last time.
You know the drill. A guy who's inexplicably mad at our protagonist with very vague powers and a weird sounding name. Don't worry, you don't need to memorize it because I'll be dead by the time the credits roll. Even Kang somehow manages to preserve this trend despite being in many different MCU projects. His superpower is effectively being the villain of the week for however long the MCU needs. His powers need to be relearned each time he appears. Each version has their own backstory. Each version we've seen has died, making the next one we see not very intimidating. One critique of Marvel that makes no sense is the amount of people who say, oh, there's no stakes in Marvel anymore. It doesn't matter if someone dies because they can be brought back through the multiverse. This argument is specifically annoying to me because when you consider the only person who has been brought back, Gamora, she was brought back to express that you cannot bring people back and have them be the same person. She is an expressly different person than the Gamora that we knew from Guardians 1. Kang is the only valid example in the MCU where it actually doesn't matter if he dies because the multiverse will dispense another one, except now that he's associated with some pretty shitty crimes, he's going to be neatly swept up and we won't see him again, which is okay. Marvel has often been criticized for just having protagonists fight evil versions of themselves, people with the same power set but evil. While often true, I don't think this is the actual issue. Look at the Black Panther movies. The first one features two people with literally the same power set fighting for the throne, but both of them have different worldviews and neither one is necessarily wrong for having theirs. And this movie is widely considered one of the better MCU entries. In Black Panther 2, Namor is just trying to protect his people, similarly to how the Black Panther as an idea is intended to protect the people of Wakanda. Competing ideology makes them oppositional, and as such, they have a genuine conflict to work through. Good motivation is absolutely key in making a villain worth investing in, which brings me to the other general issue I was trying to get to. The motivations. I know this is one of the most basic things people talk about when they talk about movies, but that's what makes it all the more frustrating to me. Something as simple as a villain having a motivation that moves the story forward should be a given, but it is so often lacking in the MCU. Look at how many villains' motivations are purely something bad happened in my life, and I blame this one specific hero and have dedicated my entire life to destroying them. Or look at ones like the one that appears in the Marvels, Darben. Darben is from a planet of such stupid idiots that when Captain Marvel turned off their computer, they couldn't figure out how not to destroy every natural resource on it. And that's what the conflict of that movie is. They're chasing Captain Marvel instead of trying to fix their planet. In Iron Man 3, the villain is Aldrich Killian, played by Guy Pearce, who specifically dislikes Tony not because he was hit by one of Stark's missiles or something, but because he no-showed him 2 decades earlier.
Well, for the first 20 minutes, I actually thought you'd show up. And the next hour, I considered taking that one-step shortcut to the lobby.
Okay, that's not exactly the whole motivation, and Iron Man 3 is underrated in my opinion, but that is kind of specifically why Killian is targeting Tony specifically. Ant-Man's Darren Cross is also an uninspiring villain. His sole motivation is that Hank Pym didn't want him to have his technology because it could be used for evil, which Darren Cross then immediately does try to use it for. You might be inclined to say, oh, but that's how comic book villains work. Even if that is true, I don't think that's a good excuse for why directors and writers shouldn't even try to make a good villain. Admittedly, I haven't read that many comics, though I have been trying to get more into them. But what I can tell from my very cursory knowledge of comic books is that villains are not usually disposed of in the same book, nor in the same run that they first appear in. Marvel is burning through all of their big name villains, using them as single movie henchmen, and not letting any of them develop at all. It would make quite a bit of sense if Marvel treated their villains a little bit more like they treated their heroes. Keep them around for a bit, let the audience get used to them, maybe have them appear in multiple things. So what should Marvel do moving forward? Well, it seems like they're going with Robert Downey Jr. playing Doom, and I think this is a genuinely good idea. There's no way that they can have Robert Downey Jr. come back for another role and then only let him be in one movie. Ideally, Fantastic Four will only have mentions of Doctor Doom, build up in anticipation. The Fantastic Four should hopefully only deal with things downstream of Doctor Doom. We need the MCU to practice restraint. Doom already has so much public cash that he has a head start at being the best villain yet. Be calculated. Have the movies in the interim be threats brought about by Doom. Build him up to an Avengers level threat. Make the audience question if their favorite hero will make it through the next phase. Whether Doom in the MCU is going to be a variant of Tony Stark who became evil, or an entirely different person who just looks like Tony Stark, don't half-bake his motivation. You could have him be a character who has experienced loss after loss, who could conceivably think that the people he is pursuing are those to blame. Or you could lean more into his comic motivations, which are a much simpler form of jealousy and perfectionism. Jack Kirby called Doctor Doom the embodiment of death and gave him an iron face because Death is merciless, and flesh is imbued with mercy and couldn't be shown. I can only hope that the MCU is setting their sights this high. Thank you guys so much for watching. I apologize again for how long it's been since my last video. If you want to keep up with me on what I'm currently watching, my TikTok and my Letterboxd are both Jacob LaFleur, and I'll have them linked below. See you in the next one.